you had that very interesting post on the teaching hero that I was really intrigued by. One, how much you loved the new movie, which seems like it's taken the world by storm. So I'd like to just chat about that, chat about what you liked about the movie, and then go into this idea that I thought was very intriguing because usually the hero is the one who is being taught by a mentor. He stumbles into a Gandalf, and you've posited this idea like, no, the hero himself can actually be somebody who pushes open a door, breaks open an idea that inaugurates something new for a community. So yeah, let's talk about how to train your own dragon and teaching heroes.
Yeah. Well, it's actually I got a chance to interview the director of the film, Dean DeBoy, and it was him who used this term teaching hero, and I had never heard it before. And so I asked him to flesh it out a little bit. And this idea that you have this character like Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon, who is in over his head in so many ways, right? At least as the society of the time, says you're supposed to be, right? Like, oh no, you're supposed to be this great warrior, you're supposed to be really strong, but he's our protagonist and he's not learning to become a better warrior. What is he doing? And so again, the director of the film is like, he's a teaching hero by his very nature, by the very virtue and skill set that he's bringing, way of proceeding, way of seeing the world, perceiving. Thank you. It's like, I know it sounds close. That's the breakthrough for this character, that not just for this character but for everybody. And so pointing the way to what might be, it felt very spiritually insightful to me. I think that's the character of Jesus, right? That's the character of the prophets, that's the character of so many of the saints. This idea that you live in the present, you live in the real world, while also being able to hold the possible future kind of juxtaposed next to the present. And I found that just very, very powerful. And I think we can all be called to that if we allow ourselves to imagine what the world might be, while also kind of keeping both feet in the present moment.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There's a bit of a corollary here. I'm fascinated by something that seems to happen in narcissistic dynamics, and this is going somewhere. The narcissistic dynamics usually have distinct roles. Like there's the golden child, there's the flying monkeys, and these all mean things in the realm of therapy. But there's often one figure that seems to just airdrop into a narcissist situation or is born into it, and it's the truth teller. Or maybe it's like at a business place or something. And this truth teller is usually the figure, sounds like a teaching hero, who stands up, who can see through everything that everybody is trying to ignore because everyone's just trying to go along to get along. And the truth teller can't hide it. And they can become a scapegoat. They can become like everybody goes after them because they can't hide the truth. They have to be seeing it. They can often become very depressed. They usually have to leave if the dynamic doesn't change, and usually, especially family dynamics don't change, and they go off and live their own lives because there's just an inability to not accept the truth. They have to be truthful. That's why they're called the truth teller. And so in seeing your thing about Hiccup being this kind of figure, this situation is locked down. They've got this ideological hatred of dragons. They're profoundly dangerous. They're here to kill us all. We're the last, I think, bastion to try to keep them all exterminated, keep humanity safe. And then Hiccup shows up in the middle, and it costs him everything constantly. And he's constantly, well, how do you say? It's like the culture has no place for a dork with a limp who can't be a warrior. But you're right. He's able to then see the world and interact with it and learn something totally different. So I'm going with this in two places. One, I want to understand as why this lit up for you on a spiritual personal level, because I think for our writing community, we're authors trying to see the world in a slightly different off-kilter way. And maybe that makes us a little bit of a truth teller sometimes, truth seeker. And then two, as we go to create characters, like how to understand what this means when we're trying to, flesh out or build out a character. And I think you're continuing to write some fiction as well. So you're versed, and of course you watch movies a ton. So you're versed in these two dynamics of like, I'm trying to be a good person and I'm trying to create fascinating characters, So let's start with the one on the spiritual level. Why did this land for you? Why did it so interest you?
I think that we are all invited to be prophetic in some way, right? And to come to understand kind of God's dream for the world, for us uniquely and for our world communally, and then point to it and walk alongside people as we all go towards it together. Right. And I think there's a lot of that happening in this How to Train Your Dragon, kind of storyline. And certainly this idea of a teaching hero, right? It's over there. That's where we're headed. The kingdom of God is over there. Let's keep going, or probably better said, the kingdom of God is here and yet I can't see it. What am I looking at in the wrong way? And
Yeah,
what I
we've
think
we've
is
built a
really
world that doesn't allow us to see the reality of what's actually here.
to see clearly, right? Yeah, and I think what I'm struck by with the story of Hiccup in particular is, um, the people that are fighting the dragons are good people. Like they aren't doing an evil as they understand, as society's been set up to do, right? They are doing what they perceive to be good and for the common good, right? That's how they're living. And so what's really interesting for Hiccup is it's not a matter of convincing people that they are evil, and to change their ways, but in fact saying, no, I actually think you've missed the mark. There's a bigger opportunity here. We can stop the killing. We can stop the way our society's been ordered, structured, and allow it to encompass so much more. So I find that, again, just like very much what we're called to do in our own lives, in our own places, our own ways. Like what are we allowed to point to, or what are we able to point to? I think the Catholic imagination is about pointing to something greater, something beyond,
It's
using the
profoundly hiccupy.
right, the raw material of today, right? So I think that's why it really struck me as a spiritual. And again, I just think that's what Jesus did. I think that's what the saints do. I think that's what so much of this is about. Who among us is able to see more clearly the kingdom of God at hand, and more importantly, what's keeping us from living into it now.
Yeah. I think we see a lot of saints and saint stories are in this unfortunate position. They're penalized and crucified and punished for challenging things like status quos, and a lot of them will live decades in silence and service and so on. What are getting a little practical here on a personal level, what would you recommend if somebody feels like they're in a position of being like teaching hero? Obviously, we're not exactly sure how heroic to be, but we are sort of the centers of our own lives. We're trying to live it out, and we feel like we've understood something that's very real and very important and powerful to us, and maybe nobody else is understanding it. Any recommendations for somebody who feels like they're in that kind of hiccup like role position, and maybe they can't push back and just snap their fingers and make everything wonderful and just work for them? What would you recommend?
I think we focus on our relationships. I think a lot of the point of the teaching hero is to point towards a reordering of society. How do we relate to ourselves? How do we relate to one another? How do we relate to creation? That's what's happening in How to Train Your Dragon, right? We're reorienting how we relate to the dragons, and in so doing, how we, what is my role in a dragon killing society if we're no longer killing dragons and I've been a dragon killer, right? How do I relate to myself and to others? So I would say, in a practical level, if that's kind of where you feel like I need to, be this teaching hero, what is it you've discovered about the world that you want to share, and how can you introduce that into your most immediate relationships, and begin to reassess, reorder, rebuild? And I think those are the building blocks of society. And you asked earlier, right, about thinking about this from a storytelling perspective, right? Thinking about this from how we write. I mean, stories are about relationships, right? We're talking about how our protagonist, or our series of protagonists, are relating to one another and growing and relating to others in our tales. So I think thinking about how that, as our stories progress, how this discovery plays out in a reordering of relationships can really bring that moral home.
Yeah, agreed. Well, you don't have a moralizing hero or somebody who's actually kind of quietly arrogant as a hero. How do you create, or how would you recommend authors who, someone a bit like Aragon, for example, and he's got an egg that he's discovered in the spine, and now he's reordering his life around this thing that could profoundly maybe ruin or destroy or change his life or something? Thoughts or recommendations for authors who like the idea of a teaching hero, feel that they're making one, how to build one out so that they feel like a good character?
I don't know if this is going to answer the question directly, but one thing that I keep coming back to in the story of How to Train Your Dragon, right? It all pivots at, when Hiccup thinks he's a warrior. He goes to kill Toothless, right? And he can't. And what I kept hearing in my head was, it was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand, right?
Well,
That's what I kept hearing. And so then I kept going into that story. It's like, oh, okay, well, because Bilbo doesn't kill Gollum, which by all accounts seemed to be the logical thing to do in that moment for, our swashbuckling hero. What happens next? What are the series of events that turn on this act of, I don't know if I love the word pity, but this act of charity, of compassion, right, of mercy towards a creature that seems to be nothing but a threat. So as we're building out characters, or building out stories, right, what's that moment? What's that turn? I mean, Bilbo's not I don't know if I would say he's a
war
teaching hero,
hero.
but he is a little bit of a teaching hero in that sense that he's showing the dwarves a different way to live.
Oh,
He's
that's true.
reordering
Yeah.
relationships. He's not the one who's going to go out and win the battle of the five armies, right? But he is the one who's in some ways helping to reorder the way that those five armies relate to one another, even more so than like Gandalf. But that moment of compassion, of pity, of seeing in a foe or someone who was really doing you harm not that long ago, this isn't my life to take. This is a life I want to see played out. I think that's a key moment in this kind of a hero's journey. And then what comes from that? Because so much, again, so much of what the director of this film said to me, or I took from his lesson, was these are virtues and characteristics that are inherent in our hero. These not just empathy, but in some ways this bumbling nature. And they're bumbling because the society of the time or the story says you should be this way instead of the way you are. And so what is that sense of otherness from the society's dictates? What does that allow our character to see and to do and to become, and then allow other, our golems and our toothlesses to become as a result? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's something I've been thinking about a lot, honestly, after having kind of delved deeply into How to Train Your Dragon and thinking about it from the spiritual lens.
Yeah, I love the corollary there of Bilbo. I'm curious if there's, now that you've got this lens to now cast your mind over some of your favorite movies and whatnot, are there other heroes that stand out as specifically teaching heroes? Have you had a moment to think about,
That's a good question. I mean, I love Star Wars, so I feel like I always look at Star Wars and I'm like, well, who would it be? Because Obi-Wan Kenobi is still fighting, right? There's still I don't know if a teaching hero necessarily needs to be someone who isn't also able to like defend themselves, with a laser sword. But I do think that you have these teachers that ask you to reassess things, and they kind of pop in briefly. I don't know. I confess I will have to give it a little bit more thought,
yeah.
but it is a lens I've been playing with in my own kind of reflection.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, not just to sort of kick the tires on this idea, like you say, so they can actually be bold heroes. They can be how do I say, well, warriors, adventurers, that sort of thing. But it seems like the concept or the underlying concept of a teachable or a teaching hero is that they bring something into their status quo that might threaten or endanger them, but it's true. And so they fight for it, or they stand up for it, or they take action. And because of that, in the context of the story, because of the actions that they take, they transform their world. There's other stories, I think, where you merely save your world and you preserve it and you keep it okay because maybe it's good and it doesn't need to be changed. And the rest of the world is bad and damaged and full of zombies and orcs, and that needs to go away. That's not a teaching hero. Maybe that's a defending hero. But for a teaching hero might forge something or bring something back in that catalyzes a different way of thinking or acting. I'm actually kind of curious about Obi-Wan Kenobi because I'm now trying to think of like the arc of his life as told through the 9 movies. And even though the entire Jedi Order is gone and destroyed, he seems to be challenged by various different examples. And then by I don't know, he kind of brings the example of the sacrifice of his life and the shortcomings. I don't know, I need to think this through, but his shortcomings that impact Rey, and then also, darn, I forgot Ben's son, Kylo Ren. And so he does bring the sort of the fruit of his life, and like, oh, Jedi Order has had it wrong. We've been, not triumphalists, but we've been lording it over people instead of serving them or something.
I wonder. So yeah, I wonder though if there's a need for a teaching hero to somehow. I just go back to that word bumbling because it feels like very Bilbo. It feels very Hiccup, at least in the first Dragon movie, right? And this need to be somewhat inept at accomplishing the goals of the society you're representing to then really manifest or this pointing towards something else, something that could be different. And I just feel like again, like Bilbo, like he was never going to be able to wield an axe like a dwarf or magic like a wizard, but he was able to show hospitality and know these riddles and suddenly, say like, what, I think the Arkenstone actually is maybe the source of all the temptation that's bright. I think, so because he wasn't playing by the rules of society. Anyway, but Obi-Wan, like I'm trying to think of like what Jedi and the canon, maybe Ahsoka to some degree, but like what are the Jedi that
Too competent, though. Maybe
right,
more of a David, like early years David showing up. And what's kind of interesting maybe is like the teachable hero or teaching hero. Maybe it's not, it's like the thought that comes through my mind is like, when I am weak, then I am strong.
Mm-hmm.
reflections of this idea. Like you're saying, if they're bumbling heroes, then something is acting or working through them. Some truth is making itself, is presencing itself in them. Like Joan of Arc seems to maybe be a bit of a teachable hero because she wasn't, I don't know that she was too much of a warrior. She did become a leader and she changed everything for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, it's some of that manifesting through the very organic interplay of your life with the society at large. And so, I mean, Joan of Arc. Again, I'm not like a scholar of Joan of Arc's story here, right? But I think was so out of character for your typical knight of the time, right? That certainly reorders things. Although then she leads the charge in a very kind of classic hero's journey type of a mode. But yeah, I don't know. I have to give some thought. We'll have to have a
Does a
follow up.
teaching hero go on a hero's journey? Is it the same kind of journey?
Yeah, I think you still have a lot of the same plot beats, right? You have to still have that kind of upside down experience. Everything is flipped. I just feel like, and again, I'm really just kind of bumbling. I'm bumbling in the dark myself here on this because I've been more feel like praying with this topic than like researching it. But I think that what again what Dean DeBlois was saying was Hiccup is manifesting it organically, right? It's like both he's living his own life as he is able to based on his own like limitations and skills, and by doing that he's kind of finding his way down this hole of discovery, where he's like, I don't think this is how society should be ordered. And then by being himself, by manifesting that kind of way of life, others are drawn to that as well and go, oh, okay. And then it happens right at the end that you know, that discovery allows them to save the day. But I think the bigger picture is this reordering of society more so than kind of taking on that big dragon. You asked at the beginning though. Let me pull one more thread. What did I like about this movie? Because I think this movie, I'm not like a big How to Train Your Dragon like scholar. I'm not like down the rabbit hole in this one so much. I like it a lot, obviously. So I watched the first one again before I went to see the live one, just so I kind of had all my kind of ducks lined up there. And it's very clear if you do that, like the key difference are there's probably like 7 minutes of additional world building and character development. And they're delivered in a couple key line changes or like 3 extra sentences in the opening. But what you come to learn, right, is that the Isle of Berk isn't just randomly inhabited by dragons. It's not just like, oh, geez, like there's a lot of dragons here. Like this is a problem. It's that this island actually is where the last holdout, I think you said this earlier, of all these dragon warriors came together to go and fight this supposed nest. And so it really changes the story pretty dramatically, because now it wasn't an accident that they're there. They're ordering their entire society around the conquest of these dragons because they feel that this is a real danger. And so now this teaching hero thing becomes even bigger, because again, it's not just like, oh, we just kind of tripped into this on this island. We just happen to be living on these dragons. But all of the whole reason people have come to this place is now in question. The whole ordering of society around the killing of dragons is called into question. So the stakes are bigger, as you said, right, for our teaching hero. But also you see how that it punctures a hole in the kind of the traditional knowledge or wisdom of the culture, which is a bigger thing. And I think we can look at that in our own day. And if maybe I've bought you enough time to give us another teaching hero example, but I think
it certainly changes the whole point of the story in the village from them being kind of a passive victims being beset by bad dragons. They're now pushing an edge, pushing a frontier into enemy territory and trying to hold a line.
And again, for the common good. They're not. It's not just like I want to put a dragon on a spike. It's I want to defend all the other people
everything
in our
that
world.
is good and safe and true about the world. And no, you're right. I think it's an insanely hard place or role to be in when everybody around you is not just convinced that they're trying to do good. There's probably a point at which some dragons did go rabid and haywire and genuinely cause problems and poison the well for everybody or all dragons after that. So this dramatic response was needed. I've only seen the original cartoons, I think, or animations maybe once through each or something, and they're wonderful. I'm curious what you think. Is the mom a teaching hero who failed?
Oh man, you're asking me maybe questions beyond my knowledge of How to Train Your Dragon. I think that's a good. You might have to remind me a little bit the full story of her.
Third movie that he goes after, or he gets a hint that his mom is alive.
His mom's still
somewhere.
alive. Right,
because she found and wants to save and preserve the dragons from the crusade her husband is on. And so she goes out to preserve them, but instead of coming back and kind of catalyzing the culture, she just stays away and safeguards them far away in this Eden.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that is um, if not a failure, an incompletion, right, of the role of a teaching hero. Because I mean, one of the things that I always think about, again with the spiritual lens, for the kind of the Joseph Campbell arc of the hero, is that the need for return, the need to bring the boons of the journey back to your community. And so, I mean, even more so as you're looking at a teaching hero, right? Because they're manifesting the lesson. So if you fail to do that, if you fail to return, then I think that means your story is incomplete. And I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious to know if you agree with that arc. I find it. I think I find it really
The idea
spiritually
of the
resonant.
return.
The need for the return. I find it spiritually resonant. I find it very much in the resurrection story, right, of Jesus. And so I like it. But I wonder, do you think that's necessary for any sort of hero?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. My mind goes two ways. One is in a story, it's an extremely satisfying way to end a story. So Bilbo coming home to Hobbiton, or what is Nemo's dad called in Finding Nemo? I forget. But the way that he comes back now a transformed fish and he's finally able to be a good comedian and makes all the dads laugh at the lineup and stuff. It's a very satisfying thing to come back. So now the question is, well, why is it satisfying and what does that mean about real life? And I think it has to do with, even if in real life it doesn't happen in a physical way, like you physically don't go back to Brooklyn because you started there, for example. I think it's the idea of you in your psychic self. Some adventure or something happens to you, and maybe it causes things like trauma or disassociation, or you now realize what I am is not enough to handle everything the world is. And so something breaks apart, and what you were sort of has to go and die, and you have to grow into something else. And then a point comes where you reintegrate and you put it all back together. And that's the coming home thing. You come back to a sense where you can go, okay, now I'm me again, but I'm different. And so it's more of a psychic, spiritual, psychological homecoming. And so in a story, we turn that into like Frodo coming back to Hobbit and going, I can never, how do you pick up the threads of an old life? I can never go back to being that whimsical book reader, under an oak tree. I'm now profoundly different, but I am still me and I'm in my old stomping grounds. And I think as people, as humans, as persons, we feel the same too. We go through a horrible adventure. A year later, we go, oh, I actually came home and I didn't pay attention because I was so busy with life. I'm still me, but at the same time, I've gone in like a spiral. There's like a new level that I've playing a new level in the game. Maybe I'm a little deeper now, a little more mature now. My insights are more developed. I can sort of look down on where I was and recognize, oh, I needed to make that transition. What do you think? Is any of that making sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, I mean, what I hear you saying, and I think is key to any story, right, is the transformation of the character, right? That's what a story is about. And that's ultimately what we're doing in our lives, right? Is growing and becoming closer, hopefully, to who God is inviting us to become. But we probably can't track that super well if we don't have kind of like a non-variable indicator, right? Something that we can kind of come back and go, oh my gosh, look how much we've grown. So there's that combination of, I think, seeing as like Frodo knows he's changed, right? Because he's back in Hobbiton and being like, oh geez, like this is something feels different. I'm different. So you see that change, but also the idea of if the point of a hero's journey or any sort of story, right, is you want to, it's not just about me, it's about the community. I think it's a very, there's some religious sensibility to that, right? That I want to bring back the thing I learned. How could I not want to share this with others? I think for me, that becomes important. That becomes important to the resurrection story. That becomes important to just like how I want to think about my own days, less epic, but like, I come back from a trip. What am I sharing with my family? What am I sharing with my friends? It wasn't just for me. So I think that sounds right to me, what you described. And I like a lot that kind of a psychological area too, right? Because it might not be readily apparent, visually apparent, but it certainly should hopefully be in the way we carry ourselves in our lives going forward.
So last question, which I think sort of brings this whole conversation together, either as a teachable hero or as somebody learning something that is valuable, that's changing our life. Why for you is the community aspect so vital to like a healthy spiritual life? Why can't I just brick myself up into a cave like Zenethia of Egypt, figure it out on my own? Why isn't that an option? Why is it such a stress for you that the community is also an aspect?
I think that's when we talk about the Catholic imagination. I think that's very Catholic, right? We go to God together. We need one another in our quest for God. We learn about God from each other, and Christ, is manifest in each of us. So what do we learn about Christ as we stumble into each other? I think that's important, and I think in part, right, we're building something beyond ourselves. It's not just about me. I think that's, again, it's kind of central to any sort of spirituality. We're letting go of those kind of false senses of self, the pride, the seeking after riches, the seeking after honors. In fact, we're trying to seek the opposite, insofar as then we kind of collide into other people. We need each other in that more kind of humble path. I think if you look at a lot of the ills of the day, it comes from a kind of that rampant individualism. I don't need anybody else, or I just need the people I want. And so, yeah, I guess it really is for me. I guess I think you're helping me to realize this as we're talking, right? That kind of the storytelling and the spirituality and my understanding of my own faith journey are so the Venn diagram is so overlapping that that for me it's like how could you not want to collide with other people, even when it's hard, or even when it's difficult, even when it's frustrating. We have a responsibility for one another, and I think these stories of transformation should underline that responsibility we have for one another, and then send us back to respond to that responsibility.
Thank
What do
you.
you
What a
think?
great response. Yeah, no, I like that. And I think that how do I say, being a human, virtually developing, growing, human it's a complex thing. And there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that happen over the course of our 70 years, 80 if you're strong, uh, path of life. And so you need a lot of different kinds of stories to sort of help you navigate and make sense and field test and start to see a way through what it means to be a human, and it's a complex thing. So, Eric, this was fun. Where can people
Always a
find you
pleasure.
online? Because I found your post on your Substack, and I think did you start a Substack more recently and then just,
So I
I
have,
don't know,
yeah.
just blow it out?
I don't know if it's blowing out yet, but maybe hit me after this talk. So my Substack is called Story Scraps. You can find me there. My website is ericclaytonwrites.com. I have a bunch of books on Ignatian spirituality and storytelling, one on Ignatian spirituality and Star Wars, one on Ignatian spirituality and peace. I have a new children's book I co-wrote with a friend on Marian apparitions. So people can find all of those things on my website, on Amazon, wherever they want to go and get their books.